I'm a marine ecologist that focuses on conservation, and so basically my job is to understand how critters interact with each other, interact with the ocean, and then how we've screwed up those interactions, and then how we might try to fix what we've broken. So as you probably heard in the news, there's been a lot of things that we've broken in the ocean, so there's no shortage of work for us to do. But the Chamber asked me to come today to actually tell you maybe a story of redemption and a story of hope. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Pismo Clams. So when I was newly hired at Cal Poly 6 years ago, I was looking for questions to ask when the city of Pismo Beach came to us and they said, hey, can you help us restore Pismo Clams? Now what they didn't know is that's actually a huge question because in order to restore something, you have to understand what led to the decline in the first place, figure out if you can fix it, and then try to fix it. And so we started looking into it, and as we dug around, we realized that there was shockingly little known about the biology of Pismo clams, despite how important they have been in this community for so long. So for a scientist, having a system that's wide open and that we don't know much about is actually really exciting. It's a huge opportunity. So I'm going to tell you a story today about what we know, what we've learned since we started this work, and what we don't know. And there's a lot that we still don't know. So you probably know that Pismo clams were incredibly abundant. How many of you have ever gone digging for Pismo clams on Pismo Beach? Okay, when was the last time you found a live Pismo clam of legal size on Pismo Beach? Yeah, it was a while ago, right? Okay, so they were harvested literally by the millions, by the Chumash, by a commercial fishery, and then by recreational fishery. They were so ubiquitous that in the 1960s they made it into the pinnacle of pop culture. How many of you have seen the Alibaba Bugs Bunny episode? You know, where he pops his head up in the cave and says, Pismo Beach and all the clams you can eat, right? You guys have seen that episode, right? That's how ubiquitous Pismo clams were through the 60s. Even in the 70s, there were people still out on the beaches. And we got to the 1980s, and we started to see a decline. And that coincided with the recovery and the reappearance of sea otters on this coast, right? Sea otters had been hunted to extinction almost 100 years ago, so they were recovering. So this is, again, what happens. We mess with one thing in the system, and a whole bunch of other things shift. So the Pismo clam population started to decline in the 1980s. There was a slight blip up in the early 90s, but there has not been a legal size, that's 4.5 inches, legal size Pismo clam seen on Pismo Beach in over 25 years. Yeah, so what happened? Well, conventional wisdom says that it was one of two things, or maybe both of them. One, the otters ate them, or two, we ate them. But the funny thing about conventional wisdom is that no one's actually done the work to test those ideas, so we figured that we'd start there. Okay, so we started collecting a little bit of data. We convinced the city of Pismo Beach to give us a small grant to kickstart this. We hired a graduate student whose name is Alex Marquardt, who's done a phenomenal job over the last couple of years. And she's been leading a lot of our field sampling. So over the last couple of years, we've surveyed over 40 beaches around the state, mostly in the summertime, right? And in the summer, low tides are in the middle of the night, 2, 3, 4 in the morning. So this team of very enthusiastic graduate students and undergrads are out there in the middle of the night. I'm really happy that they're doing that. We've also been doing monthly surveys on Pismo Beach and making some collections to understand reproduction. Okay, so what have we found? So first, when we combine all of our data from across the state, we run that through a complex statistical model to evaluate these hypotheses that humans fished them or otters ate them. We find no evidence for either one of those ideas, right? So it's clearly not as simple as otters ate them or people ate them, which is not to say that the decline wasn't partly responsible for that, but the data that we see across the state does not suggest that it's just as simple as otters or people. A couple of other things that we found, that habitat seems to be really important. That is, how big the sand is seems to be the driving factor for where we see them or we don't. The second thing we found is that there are still lots of clams on Pismo Beach. We did a lot of surveys when we started, found a lot of zeros in places, kept saying zeros are still data, which is true. But most of the clams we found on Pismo Beach are less than 2.5 inches. That's still 2 inches smaller than legal size. And what we don't know is how fast they're growing, how well they're surviving, and whether they're actually going to make it to get to that legal size. So that's a long list of questions that we don't know, right? We don't know how fast they grow. We don't know how long it takes them to get to be that legal size. We also have no idea why they started appearing on the beaches just a couple of years ago. We started seeing them, these little babies, in about 2015, and where they came from, right? So we've answered a few questions, but there's a whole lot more that we don't know. But that's part of the fun of doing science. We answer one question, and it raises two more. And of course, that takes time, and it takes money. And so here's my little sales pitch. We need lots more money. We had a very small amount of funding from the city of Pismo Beach that helped us get this started. And so if the chamber or any of you are feeling generous and want to support local science and local students, please come talk to me. But we're hoping that we'll eventually get to answer that question that Pismo Beach asked. Can we bring them back? I don't know, but we'll find out. Thanks.